We are definitely live. Santa, thank you for joining me for this live stream. So we went through quite a bit of questions in the actual podcast itself. For those who are interested, definitely go check out the podcast on YouTube. It'll be out here in a couple of days. But there was a couple different things that I didn't ask you on, and there's like about one or two things I want to ask you again, just for the people who will come for this live, but not for the other podcast. First and foremost, running for Congress in the state of Alaska, you currently have ranked choice voting up there. I know you spoke about this already, but can you just tell me, how do you feel about ranked choice voting, and do you believe it's a good thing for the state?
I think ranked choice voting is great. And a quote from me, I'm just going to read it because I don't want to misquote myself.
Yeah.
Ranked choice voting reduces partisanship, encourages more candidates to run, boosts voter turnout, takes power away from special interests and out-of-state influence, and makes it almost impossible for anyone to rig an election. So that's what I think of ranked choice voting. And I'm one of the beneficiaries. And just by virtue of looking at the Alaska election, do we have more candidates? Yes, we've got 48 right now for this one position. We're going to have more voters. Yes. As far as partisanship goes, we're taking a lot of the power away from the Democratic and Republican other parties that have candidates in this particular race. Because what can they do? 48 candidates, they have no clue who's going to win. I do have name recognition. Sarah has some. There are some in-state candidates who have name recognition. And a lot of us have experience. Some of us don't have quite as much. And there's this array. And I think everybody should have a chance to run if they want to run. And I don't think it should be tied to people who can run because they, have money or, different kinds of support and stuff. And why shouldn't people be able to support their candidates on their own? They don't need a party telling them what to do. They don't need, like a middleman, a middlewoman to, help them do this. If they make a donation, I'm not seeking donations or accepting donations myself, but if a voter were going to make a donation, why should that go through a party? Why should they even make a donation? Why not make a homemade sign with their candidate's name on it, put it in their window or put it on their lawn, or make a few phone calls with friends, or canvass with friends. There are lots of things people need to get on social media and talk about it. And they can mention it on podcasts like we're doing. And there are lots of ways people can help candidates with their campaigns without, they can just do it independently. They don't need to coordinate it with a candidate. It takes an inordinate amount of candidates' time to try and, get all that stuff going, and voters can do it themselves.
So speaking of, the voters, I know that we went through a whole different list of, reasons like why people should vote for you, how you stand on the issue, so on and so forth. And again, for those who are just joining us for this live portion, definitely check out the other podcasts that will be out on my YouTube channel very shortly in the next couple of days. One of the things that I noticed on your platform when I first came across you, I think like a month and a half ago, was that you had put down on your platform that you were about child safety, health, and welfare. This was a question I didn't get to ask you in the podcast itself. Why was that one of the central, themes for your campaign, and things that you've done in the past while you have been an elected official?
Well, when I was growing up, I had the opportunity. I grew up in an upper middle class family in New York City, of all places, even though I was born in Washington, D.C. And I got to discuss with other children at the time, my age, what they were going through when they came from families that weren't quite so well off, or from countries that weren't quite so well off. And when I got into public safety, I saw a lot of children falling through the cracks. The social services weren't really a web. It was more sort of independent, individualized things with different files for different children, and the information wasn't shared to help them, and all those kinds of issues. So I became sensitive to it. And when I went into the ministry, my ministry was to protect child health, safety, and welfare, and to advocate for the protections with state and federal legislators. So that's how that kind of started. And I went on a tour after I changed my name to Santa Claus in 2005, I went on this, every state plus the District of Columbia, and went to state and federal legislators and talked about issues that affect child health, safety, welfare, including abuse, neglect, exploitation, abandonment, homelessness, institutionalization, S-chip insurance, foster care, adoption, that sort of stuff. And I was getting some very good feedback, but what I noticed was the states back then didn't have coordinated efforts. So if a child were being seen for, let's say, a medical reason, that those medical professionals don't have that child, or back then didn't have that child's educational record or their community record or an arrest record, or whatever it is that they have, different files that they might have on them because of different privacy concerns. After my tour, and after sharing a lot of information between states, which they really weren't doing themselves, one file per child came out of it. And that meant that a child who's in any government program has a file, and if they're in another government program and it would help them to share that information, still protected, they should do it. So one file per child came into it, and then at 18, that file is either sealed or destroyed, whatever. So that was one out of maybe half a dozen things that came out of that tour, which were good for children. So that's how I developed that interest in it. And then when I did change my name and just started doing more legislation related stuff, that's what I stuck with.
Okay. I definitely appreciate that. One of the other things I didn't get a chance to mention before when we were speaking is, another issue that affects younger people, being student debt, which has, been kind of floated recently by the Biden administration. Biden, during his campaign, promised that he would forgive around $10,000 worth of student debt. He has yet to do that. He is now floating the ideas of doing at least something. But there have been debates sparked about this, about the, whether or not this is good politics, so on and so forth. Where do you land on this issue? Do you think that the Biden administration should be forgiving some student debt?
Since he promised to do it, I think that administration should do it, but I think they should take into consideration the students' means and put a cap on the interest rate that's paid on the amount, so the lenders aren't, getting a windfall out of whatever the government decides to pay off, if anything. When I was going through school, I incurred student loans, and I know a lot of other people who have. And for some people, it's very crushing. It stays with them for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, not being able to pay them off for one reason or another. And it, even though they're using their education, presumably to contribute to the betterment of society, whether it's at work or home or, doing any other thing they might be interested in doing, if they're using what they learned in school or using how they learned to think in school, then that's an investment in them, in our community, and our nation. Okay. So I think we get a pretty big bang for the buck with education. So I'm not averse to having the government take care of some of that.
Okay, I appreciate that. And also, I think pivoting definitely, away from this subject and kind of going a little bit different direction. We kind of also talked about, defense when you were talking at the end of the podcast about where you thought, what was relevant for the state of Alaska. But, I also know that how we allocate, powers when it comes to the military has been, in question for a long time, as far as whether or not these things should be more left in the hands of Congress, or if the president should be able to maintain the ability to deploy troops whenever he or they see fit. So where do you fall on this? Do you think that military, authorization should be brought back to Congress, or should they stay with the president as they currently are?
It should definitely be brought back to Congress. The War Powers Act should definitely be brought back. All wars are against children. That's the way I look at it. So whatever we're doing here or abroad has an impact on children, our children and their children. So I would like to see those decisions made by more than just one person who may be having a bad day.
Right. So you think that it's just unethical to leave it like with just the president as it currently stands?
I'm not sure if I use the word unethical. I'd say impractical and somewhat unfortunate the way it's set up right now. It puts a lot of extra strain and pressure on a president when it should be a consensus. War should be a last resort. We have the State Department, we have intelligence channels, we have all these other, resources to prevent war. That's why it is the Defense Department, not the War Department. And I think the last resort should fall to Congress. And even though the president, as I understand it now, has 48 hours to report they're going to war on some exigent, issue that's this big emergency where he doesn't have time to sound out, Congress, or she, if it happens to be a female president. I think that Congress should be involved, pretty much from the get-go. And I kind of, for an example, why does the United States support the Saudis' intervention in Yemen? What's up with that?
That's a great question.
About it. So that's just one little example, and how we're addressing the whole situation in Ukraine and Africa and all sorts of other nations that in my opinion, all the big countries with resources do pretty much the same thing. They're either protecting their resources or they're going after somebody else's resources.
Okay.
People, technology, oil, whatever. So and a lot of that causes wars. So I think we should kind of back away from that entire, thinking, I want this, we got to win this football game. We got to, do this. We got to, do that, because we're tough. That whole thing about that whole argument now about freedoms, freedoms, we have freedoms to do this, that, and the other thing. And what I hear is, and it's totally antithetical to what I believe is freedoms, but I hear freedoms: who can vote, what you can say, who can and cannot protest, what teachers can teach, what students can read, what women can and can't do with their bodies, all that stuff. That has, freedoms. People say, oh, we're fighting for our freedoms. Well, I don't know. That's not the way I look at freedoms. If people are trying to control those things I just mentioned, that's not freedom. I saw a t-shirt the other day that said, if you don't need to wear a mask because God will protect you, why do you need a gun?
That's a fair question. That is it would feel as though that'd be a question directly aimed at, more conservative leaning voters and legislators. And that's one of the things I want to ask you about really quickly here before we kind of, pivot to the end. I have a question here from the office or from the audience. It says, on the subject of child safety, what steps will you take if elected to protect our LGBTQ youth, specifically trans kids, as we are seeing them, being attacked from different state legislatures around the country? What would you specifically do to, protect these children who seem to be under assault right now?
Well, it's a great question, and it's something that pops up on my Twitter feed constantly, which it's good to get that kind of feedback and concern. I am very concerned about the LGBTQ plus community and communities. When I went to seminary and when I went to graduate school, the one thing I distilled from it all, and I'll be 75 and very shortly this month, and the one thing I distilled from it all is we are to love one another. Doesn't say if, doesn't say because, doesn't say oops or anything else. We are to love one another. No qualification. So my perspective is, if you want to help people, LGBTQ plus and all people, indigenous people, everybody has a right to love, respect, and nurture. And I see that being attacked constantly. And it's such a simple kind of rule. Love one another. So for the LGBTQ plus, I think I would put some more enforcement in the Justice Department and just remember the laws and legislation protecting minorities, and civil rights and stuff. LGBTQ plus people, in my view, have civil rights, and their civil rights often are violated. And just like with bullies in school, I'm subject to a couple of attack ads, and it made me think of the paradigm between love and fear. It's not love and hate. The hate comes from fear, but love versus fear. So when people bully somebody else, they're projecting their fear onto that person. Their fear of a different way of life or a different loss or something they're personally experiencing or they're equating it with. So for them, it's something fearful. It's challenging something they believe or something they do or don't want to have happen. And unfortunately, they're directing it at the wrong people. They should be looking inward instead and saying, what is causing me to think this way? And how can I change it? Whether it's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry to cut you off here. I what you're saying here is like resonating with me in a slightly different way now. I'm thinking about the divisiveness in our country. You live in a red state, but it's definitely not like a dark red state. It definitely seems as though there's some independents up there, some Democrats up there around the Anchorage area. Running statewide in the state of Alaska, especially being someone who does seem to have more left-leaning policies. So when you said yourself that you feel very similar to Bernie Sanders, how exactly do you plan to appeal to all the different people in the state of Alaska who might not exactly agree with you or just so used to circling anyone's name who has the letter R next to it that they might have a hard time circling your name instead, who doesn't have a letter R next to it?
Yeah, good question. Well, I'm in the last part of my second term on city council, so I was reelected as a blue dot in probably the reddest part of the state of Alaska. So I must be doing something that resonates with people in a positive way. It's also that member of the Alaska Public Broadcasting Commission. And up here, I've always managed to find some common ground. And when I was on that tour, that Santa's Blessed Children tour to all 50 states and the District of Columbia, I found common ground with legislators at the federal and state level, just like I do now at the local level. We may have disparate political views, but anybody who's elected to office represents their entire constituency, like you were saying. If I represent Alaska, I'm representing, they're about a third, just roughly speaking, they're about a third Democrat, a third Republican, a third independent, a little bit more independent than either of the other two, but it kind of washes out that way. So when Bernie was running against Hillary up here, he managed to garner 82% of the vote in the primary, for the Democrats. So, and he also got a lot of independent support. And I think my and his platform resonate with a lot of people here, whether it's as much as it was back then or not, I have no clue. But I've always managed to find common ground. Did it with a fellow who died, Don Young, and who was our congressman for 49 years. And we did it on unusual things like I've been a medical marijuana patient for more than a decade for cancer, and it's helped keep that at bay. So I was supportive of his congressional cannabis caucus and also supportive of some of the things he wanted to do to support fisheries and also rail to Canada, train stuff. And so we found some common ground with that. There's a great famous photograph of the two of us shaking hands and sort of laughing because we actually enjoyed each other's company, even though we only maybe agreed like 5 or 10% of our different political views. Both senators that we have here are Republican, and one of them is a big military supporter. Well, I'm all for stemming military suicides, for stemming sexual assault in the military, for finding adequate housing for the military, things like that. So even though he and I have, differing views on defense and the military, there's enough there for us to work together. And the other senator is now interested in the challenges of the aging population. And I'm part of that population. So we have a common interest right there. So it's not, I would be representing, everybody. And I have my own, little agenda and platform, but my platform doesn't hurt anybody.
Okay.
So I doubt that too many people are going to take much issue with it. And as you know, I'm an independent, progressive, democratic socialist, but the word that sticks in people's mind is socialists, but it's democratic socialist. I know that we live in a democracy. I know that this is a capitalist society. So when I try to do something to reform, do social reform, that sort of stuff, I do it within those parameters, like the Medicare for All type thing. That can be done gradually. Lower the age, qualification age, perhaps expand some of the benefits, et cetera. It's not like instantly we're going to do this. One has to work together, a little bit of compromise, a little bit of moving forward, and no stonewalling. So I think most legislators would agree with me. And there's a small percentage, of course, who don't. And I'm not even sure it's worth spending time engaging with them. But I think there are far more legislators on both sides out, and independents and minority party members who can agree to move things forward to benefit a lot of people.
Well, hey, I appreciate that. I appreciate that message of positivity, especially in a week like this. We definitely need some more positivity. Given everything that's going on. As my final thing for you, same question I posed to you in the episode. Why is it that the people of Alaska should vote for you, and when is voting commencing in the state of Alaska?
They should vote for me for the reasons I just mentioned. Plus, up in Alaska, with the infrastructure challenges we have, we need broadband for business, education, military. We need a more robust defense array, this being the Defense Department, and we're right next to Russia. We also have issues with natural resources. I'm all for not subsidizing the big companies, big oil and gas companies, and even some of the mining companies. They're laughing all the way to the bank. Pretty much they're sitting on leases they don't even use, yet they want to sort of invade the Arctic Refuge and Bristol Bay and some other things. So I'm all for a cleaner environment. We have water contamination problems up here and stuff. So pro-environment, pro-defense, pro-infrastructure. Those are three good reasons. You've heard a lot of the rest. And everything a legislator does here or anywhere else has a direct or indirect impact on children, on child health, safety, and welfare. So I would go in for a short term, do the best I can, leave it better off for the next person, and hope that people vote for me from their heart. That's where I'm coming from. I'm not into anybody's pocketbook. I'm not looking for a career, in this. I'm not, looking for all these, ancillary, benefits, from going to Congress. So I'm hoping people will take that to heart and vote for me.
Santa, thank you so much for coming on the show today, doing this extended interview with me, the first podcast and now this live portion. For those who are interested in Santa's campaign, there'll be some links in the episode description below where you can follow along with the websites and the Twitter account. Voting has already begun in the state of Alaska. The last day to vote is on June 11th, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's all by mail. So people were receiving their ballots last week, and I imagine most of it will be done by the end of next week.
Okay.
There'll be a month to see what happens with the last few.
So if you're in the state of Alaska, definitely, make sure to get your votes in now. And if you are wanting to support Santa's campaign, I think from what you told me, you want people just to share something online,
share something online, be creative, just have fun with it. I'm not telling anybody what to do or what not to do. If somebody wants to organize and do something, don't tell me about it. Just do it, please. I'll be delighted. And just, let it come from your heart and have a little fun with it. Thank you.
All right. I love it so much. Thank you so much for coming on today. Thanks for everyone who watched this. We will see you in the next video. Take care.